So I'm really looking forward to you helping us as a church in the UK and in Ireland and all around the world figure out how we can find volunteers and keep volunteers. So over to you, Rhonda.
Well, thank you so much, Duncan. Thanks for having me here. And I don't know why they would want to listen to me, because you have the accent that really makes, everyone happy. So I apologize. I don't have the amazing accent from the UK or Australia or anywhere else in the world. I've got that, boring American accent. So, well, Duncan is one of my favorite people. And if you haven't gotten a chance to meet him personally, I would recommend that you try to do that. He is sharp and wise and always funny. One of my favorite stories about him in America was he came over to our house for dinner, and we just had a great time just hanging out, having dinner and laughing. So Duncan, please come back. And I can't wait to come visit you over in the UK at some point. So
if you promise to cook me those filet steaks, then I will be back like a shot.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And like Duncan said, oops, it looks like, Becky, can you help me out here on that? It's saying that it's disabled. I'll try it again here in just a second. I'll go ahead and share my screen here and get our little thing started. Let's just do this. And hopefully everyone can see that okay. So like Duncan mentioned, I work for North Point Ministries and North Point Partners here in America. I've worked on this team for about 3 years, doing guest experience and what we call ministry services. So we work with executive pastors and directors. And then prior to that, I worked at North Point Community Church, which was one of our largest campuses here in Atlanta. And I led over 1,200 volunteers during my time there. And prior to that, I was at a partner church in Colorado Springs. And so I also led a bunch of volunteers. So I've led different volunteers, team sizes from 20 volunteers all the way to 1,200 and everything in between. So I know the pain of trying to figure out how to gain and figure out where are those volunteers. And so, and in no time, there's been no time like this coming out of the pandemic when we're all feeling the pain of trying to figure out where are these volunteers. It's, now we're starting to open up our churches, and a lot of our volunteers have decided to retire or have gone MIA, or maybe they just really enjoy watching church from their couch. So I thought we would just start off with figuring out what are some ideas, because I feel like this is a season where we've got to be more creative than ever to figure out where are these volunteers, how do we inspire them, how do we get them on board. So I just thought I would just talk through several ideas about how we can actually do that. So here's a few ideas. So I'm just going to walk through and talk about these ideas a little bit. But recruiting rewards, one of our churches did this idea where they put together a jar and they said, hey, for every volunteer that you recruit, you can put your name in a jar. And then at the end of every month, we're going to have a drawing, and there'll be some some gift card or some sort of reward for recruiting volunteers. And that's been helpful and effective for at their church. Of course, friends inviting friends, that's nothing new. This one about utilizing the groups, maybe some of you guys are already doing this, but I think this is a really interesting one to figure out how to partner with your groups director in 2 ways. One, find out who is attending a group already, and maybe they're not already serving, but if they're already engaged in one part of your church, like attending a group, they may be more open and more of a hot lead or a warm lead to inviting them to come and serve on your teams. So that's one way. Another thing in terms of utilizing your groups is really trying to figure out how do you mobilize whole groups to kind of try to serve together. So it's really kind of thinking about like going to your groups director and partnering with them and saying, hey, what would it look like to push this recruiting idea out through groups, and even inviting entire groups to maybe join on a particular Sunday, or join maybe in your elementary program, like, hey, what if we serve together, and just to create additional community. The next one here, volunteer. This is something that some of our churches are trying right now. I think it's a neat idea. They do maybe like a once a month Sunday or something like that, where they might serve lunch, and then they just give them a tour, like kind of behind the scenes backstage tour of their church, and maybe meet a few staff members. If the lead pastor is available, that's always helpful too. They get a little vision, and they get to see what is actually happening behind the scenes. And that's like not while it's happening, versus this next one, a sneak peek, is kind of like, hey, here's while church is happening, let's take people on a journey through, let's say for example, you take them into the student ministry and they get to actually see what is happening in there. So they're not afraid of it. So that's kind of nice. This taste and see idea, this is really about asking people to commit to, like, say 2 Sundays. Maybe over the summer you say, hey, these 2 Sundays, would you, you group your Sundays together. Would you be willing to serve for just 2 Sundays over the summer? Or you could say 4 or whatever you want to say. But it's almost that taste and see. Almost everyone would say, oh yeah, I could do 2 Sundays. And then you might have them on the hook. So it's one of those taste and see, try it and you might like it kind of things. I love this next idea, church-wide serve campaigns, and some of you guys may do it. This, if you can see this little logo at the bottom, this difference maker, this is a campaign that our church did pre-pandemic to kind of just, create this team feel. And we had a message around it. Like we went all out. Every volunteer who served, whether they were serving that day or not, was given one of these difference maker t-shirts. And so there was just a visual when you walked into the building. It's like, why is everybody wearing these difference maker t-shirts and how do I get one? And so it's like, again, whether you were serving or not. So there was like a sea of t-shirts all wearing the same thing. And then they would do different things like, hey, if you want to sign up today, we'll give you one of these difference maker t-shirts. Or if you sign up today, we'll give you like a magnet and you'll get your difference maker t-shirt when you come to orientation or something like that. So just kind of a big idea of a whole church-wide campaign. We've also done one around best day ever, thinking like, hey, the day we get to serve is the best day ever. And so we've made it kind of a big party and lots of colorful ideas. And then an I love Sundays. Again, we had t-shirts that said I love Sundays. And then we had like a Sunday bar out in the lobby, like an ice cream Sunday bar, just to, kind of tie that in and kind of draw people into an idea of, hey, I want to be a part of this. And as you guys know, everybody wants to be on a winning team. So when you begin to see that, wow, look how many people are doing this and I'm not, it's kind of like, wow, I'd love to be a part of this. And especially if you can tie the message into it as well. Here's some other ideas in terms of segmented messaging. I really love this idea. And I think the pandemic kind of showed us more than ever that this was important. And that was one of those things, as you reached out to your volunteer teams and found out, like maybe you surveyed them to find out, hey, are they ready to come back? And some were ready and some weren't. And some said, I'm not coming back at all. And some said, I'm not coming back until masks are no longer required, or I'll only come back when the vaccine is widely distributed. So whatever they told you, you almost drop those people into a category where now you can do targeted messaging for their need or their felt need. And so rather than sending a message to recruit to all volunteers, if they already told you that I'm not ready to come back until XYZ, then you put them in that category, but you just keep communicating to them in the way that they would want to be communicated to. So you're not making an ask yet, you're just staying in connection. Stay in relationship with those volunteers, maybe sharing vision, but you're not making any asks. And then as their category, changes when masks are no longer required, for example, then you can say, hey, I noticed this is, this happened. Are you ready to come back now? So you actually do some targeted messaging there. Student impact is all about getting your high schoolers involved. If your high school ministry lands on a time that is different than your main services, it's a great opportunity to recruit some of those students to say, hey, would you be willing to serve at the Sunday morning, for example, if your student ministry, for example, is like a Sunday night or a Wednesday night or something like that. It's a great opportunity to get them, and especially if they can bring a friend. High schoolers want to be with their friends, so recruiting them together is a really great ask. This leader ask, again, this one's nothing super new, but what I love about this is it's engaging your staff as well as your key volunteer leaders and saying, hey, I'm making not just would you recruit, but I'm asking every leader to contribute 2 names. If they can give us 2 names, then the volunteer coordinator or whoever's going to follow up with them can make all those asks directly, but asking everybody on staff and everybody that's a leader to just provide 2 names of people that they know that aren't serving somewhere yet. And then, kind of create almost a drip campaign to try to reach them through some emails in different ways. Circle back is really going back to if you've kept great records on your volunteers in the past, it's really circling back to those people who maybe stopped volunteering after a while, and then they stopped volunteering for a while, and then they're ready to come back. So maybe they stopped volunteering 2 years ago or something like that. Then maybe they're ready to come back because you have a need and everything. The database, the giving database, again, this is similar to the group's idea, but it's working with your financial person at your church to say, hey, who might be giving? Now, obviously, this is a little bit sensitive. But anyway, you work with your financial person to figure out, hey, again, if they're giving, they're probably more engaged than you think. But if they're not serving, it's a great opportunity to say, to speak to them uniquely without calling out that they're giving necessarily, but that they're somewhat interested and engaged in because they're giving part of their treasure to you. Maybe they would also be willing to give part of their time to you. This next one, combining teams. This is just kind of creatively taking the 50,000 foot view of your teams and saying, what can be combined? What is essential? And what could actually be combined, maybe, and taking 2 teams that, at one point were 2 teams, could you combine them together to create a full team? And that might be reducing some roles and responsibilities. It's making sure, obviously that doesn't work super well in student or children's ministry when you have ratios, but it might work well for your guest experience teams and maybe your parking team and things like that, to be able to combine roles and responsibilities to be able to stretch those volunteers a little bit further. Or in some cases, you might have volunteers on a schedule of every month, and you might consider going to every other week and casting the vision around why this is so important for right now. And that's another way to kind of grow that volunteer pool. Why is this not moving? For some reason, my screen's, am I stuck on your side, Duncan?
Yeah, you're stuck on the same combining teams was your last bullet point.
Why is this not working?
Do you need to put another 50p in the meter?
I guess so, yeah. This is so strange. I'm not sure why that's happening.
Is it worth coming out of it and going back into it again?
I'm trying to.
And by the way, doing a little song halfway through in Spanish was just lovely. Well done. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Lovely. So it looks like my screen is working again. So I'm going to continue on. So in terms of, I think this lead pastor video is a great idea. Having your lead pastor take his cell phone and just doing a quick 30 to 40 second vision cast on why volunteering is important, and kind of, maybe doing 3 or 4 different ones. And they can do them all at once, but just put them in a bank and kind of overuse those. Utilizing those strategically when it makes sense. Sometimes people want to hear from the top person to figure that out. And then another thing is social media. You'll see on this first little picture that difference maker t-shirt is on this guy. This is actually a video that one of our partner churches created, and he just talks about his experience. And I think this is a great idea, is doing a little video from a current volunteer who's loving what they're doing, where he talks about being afraid to sign up to serve, and then how he got involved, and a little bit about his training. And he talks about the training so easily, but he just a small amount of time. But he basically is just saying, hey, they made it easy. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't come experienced, and they taught me how to do it. So he talks a little bit about that. And then these other 2 pictures that you see here, you'll see the one that says Culture Builder at the top. This is kind of a campaign that one church has rolled out in terms of, like, they just highlight a person or a family that's serving, and then they put it on their social, and they always have a link to, if you would like to become a culture builder, you can find the link in our bio or different things like that. So they have this whole campaign around being a culture builder in their church. So, and this is probably my favorite idea. I don't know if anybody has heard about these Instagram influencers, but big companies are paying a lot of money to these sometimes teenagers who are coming up with, and like they're opening boxes on social media, and they're getting paid an enormous amount of money for just creating a following and then opening these boxes, talking about the product, and getting people to purchase. So if you think about that, the thing I love about this for the church is I don't know how to do this, and I haven't done this, but I think there is something there for churches to think about. And I think there's I can't wait till a church figures this out. And honestly, my generation of people are probably not going to be those influencers. So we really need to look at that younger generation. Maybe if there's a teenager even, or a 20-something person who could figure this out. I think, and that's going to take somebody who has a ton of creativity and is going to be able to give them a little bit of guidance, but a lot of freedom to figure this out. And I just think there's something to it. I listened to this podcast where there's this high school girl who in 3 months made over $1 million opening boxes on Instagram. So I know there's something to it. This is an emerging place and an emerging field. I just think that's our job as church leaders, to figure out how do we convert that from the business world to our church world, and what could we do with it? So if Duncan, if one of your churches or one of the leaders listening here gets to this, I would be so excited to hear about it, because I keep talking to our churches here about it, and I don't know how to do it, but I know somebody's going to figure this out, and I'm super excited about that.
I mean, Rhonda, I think that's fantastic, because you just have to look through some of the Instagram accounts of people in your church, and you realize there are people like me that have about 4 followers. Yes. And then you get these other people that have 4,000 followers, and you think, how do they buy them? I mean, how do they do that? And if you can hunt out the ones that have lots of followers, therefore have a lot louder voice and a lot more influence, maybe they're the ones you can lean into to try and unbox a few things about volunteerism on your platform. It's a great idea. Absolutely. I think there's something to it. I'm excited about it. And Duncan, to that point, like, I could see it even being leveraged in a hosting moment on the stage. Like, hey, if you haven't followed this person, and that person's going to get even more followers. Now, obviously, you're going to have like, this person's going to, and maybe it's just on your account. To be honest, maybe it's even 3 or 4 different followers that are people who could all contribute to it. I don't know the answer, but I think it's worth exploring, and somebody's going to figure this out for the church, and I'm excited about that. All right, so training volunteers. I mean, now we got them, hopefully. Now we've built our teams, and now we've got some. Now what do we do with them? The interesting thing about training is never once and done. It's an ongoing process. And, we think we train them on the onset, and then we think, oh, I better create an annual training, or some sort of a training event for people to come to. And the reality is, no one wants to go to a training event. There's nothing appealing about it. There's nothing exciting about it. No one wants to give their time to a training. Now, I think in the church world, I've seen too often where people say, hey, it's a volunteer appreciation event. We want to appreciate you. And then when they get there, it's really a training. So it's like this bait and switch idea. And so I would say, if you're doing that, consider separating those. Make your training events training, and make your appreciation events appreciation, and make sure that they feel like this wasn't a bait and switch. Now, having said that, what do? We all still need to train our volunteers. Something, again, if the pandemic has taught us anything, I think it's that one of the things I think we need to think through is, are there other ways to train volunteers than making them come in and spending an hour or 2 in our buildings? And that might be that you create some training videos. It might be that you create some training modules where you actually have, it could be a series of 10 videos where they just work through them, a couple minutes at a time, and they're dropping tons of vision, but you're actually making it kind of fun for them. And then it's repeatable and scalable as well, which is really great. So having said that,
how do we actually train volunteers? I'd love to talk about this idea of leading out of a set of values, not rules. And what I love about this, and I'm going to use some American examples here, but Southwest Airlines is they do this at their organization. They lead with a set of values and rules, and their values are that they want to make customers happy, they want on-time departures, and that they don't want it to cost anymore. So, for example, if a person comes up and to the gate and says, "Hey, I got to the airport early. I'd love to see if there was an earlier flight." They can see on the board that there's an earlier flight to wherever they're going. And as long as, at some airlines say, "Oh, you have to go down the hall, get in line at customer service, pay $100, pay a fee to make a change." And honestly, we don't even know that you can do that the day of. Southwest Airlines says, "Will it make my customer happy? Will we still leave on time? And will this cost us any more money to put this person on this flight?" So they've pushed the decision making to the gate attendant rather than making you go to the customer service attendant. So they've actually pushed us down. So for us at North Point, we decided to train all of our volunteers around also 3 values. And those 3 values were prioritizing the guest, and anticipating their needs, and removing obstacles. So if you think about that, if we're going to prioritize the guest and we train around that, then volunteers, when they're talking to one another, which they're going to do, but too often they stay talking to one another even when the guest appears. But if they get this embedded in them, then all of a sudden they stop their conversation with a co-volunteer and turn their attention to prioritize that guest. So we're always talking about prioritizing the guest, anticipate their needs, think about them before they come. What system would actually encourage them? What will they be thinking when they walk in? And thinking about what will they need? What will they be looking for when a new guest walks in? So you're always training your volunteers around those values. And then, of course, removing obstacles. The last thing we want to do is stand in the way of a reason why either a volunteer would join our teams or why a guest would want to come in our building. So we want to remove any obstacle that could possibly be in their way. And that's just across the board with all volunteers. Moving down to clearly communicating the win. If a volunteer doesn't know exactly what their win is, they will manufacture one. So for example, if they didn't have that set of values, they might say, "Well, my win is to actually build community with my neighbor, my co-volunteer." So they've always got to know what the win is and to be able to go after that. Here's a quick example of that. I went to a sandwich shop with my daughter a few months ago. And when I went in, you could tell that this volunteer, or this cashier, not volunteer, this employee had been trained, and she did her job technically correct, right? But she missed the most important things. So she missed a win of interacting with the customer. So she took my order, she took my money. Honestly, I always have a complicated order, so I wasn't confident that she actually got it because she didn't interact with me at all. So we went to our seat, and I said, what are the odds that my sandwich is going to come out right? We both bet against it. And lo and behold, it actually came out right. And that taught me something. She did the training, she had the transaction right. She missed out on the interaction. And so she put that transaction above the interaction with a guest, rather than the interaction being the win. Had she been told and trained on, hey, the interaction with the customer matters, I might have gotten a better experience. Technically, she did her job great. Personally and relationally, there was a lot missing, if that makes sense. And really going back to, celebrating the expressions of the values. This is super important. Andy Stanley loves to say around here, what's rewarded is repeated. And it's so true. We all know that with our kids, if you're training dogs, what's rewarded is repeated. So when we have an opportunity to celebrate an expression of the values, we should do that publicly in front of our other volunteers at every chance that we can. It's one of those things where you're reinforcing not to one person, but to the entire crowd of what you're looking for. And then you want to make that training easy, obvious, and strategic. So if it's difficult, if it's wrong, if the time doesn't work for volunteers, if it's, whatever it is, if you have and obvious and strategic, then they're just not going to do the training, and you're going to be frustrated as a leader. And then we go back to ensuring that your training is memorable, meaningful, and motivational. No, again, like I said earlier, no one wants to go into a training. What training evokes? Boring and unnecessary, especially as a volunteer. You're kind of like, think about a guest service volunteer. They're sitting there probably thinking, you want to train me on how to welcome someone to your church or how to say hello? Like, no, we don't. We want to train you on our values, not necessarily the tasks, because they can figure out the tasks. If people get the values, they will figure out the what out of that. So we got to make it memorable. We've got to make it meaningful, and we've got to make it motivational. We've got to inspire people, tell stories that bring up emotion. So, either make them laugh or make them, those stories that you hear when the hair stands on the edge of your skin because it just touched you in some way. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. Making it meaningful, making it motivational, and leaving them with a story that is memorable so that they are like, I can't wait to be a part of that. And maybe I can have one of those stories about me as well.
Rhonda, I was sat in your church it must have been 2 or 3 years ago, learning from Bill Willits and his team about regroup. And he was talking about generosity and how showing kindness and showing generosity can be a thing that pulls people together. And we'd been in this session from early in the morning right through till kind of 1 o'clock. It was a long day, lots of sessions. And then when Bill finished talking about it, he said, by the way, take a look to your right. The doors open and in came trolley loads of Chick-fil-A that just got put out on all the tables. Talk about training becoming memorable and talk about being motivational. It wasn't just someone talking about how generosity can create a great experience. He was demonstrating it as well. So what do I remember about Regroup from 3 years ago? We got free Chick-fil-A for lunch, and it made me want to come back and be part of it again. So I totally agree. It doesn't have to be a flip chart in the corner of a room where you go and make your own coffee out of a jar at the back. Absolutely. Brilliant.
Absolutely. And even if you make these into videos, again, you want to make them memorable. You want to make them fun, something funny. And honestly, one of the things that I've heard lately, actually more in the business world than the church world, but we can learn from that, is even if you're doing a training online, how can you make it memorable? Like you just said, Duncan, can you send something to their house ahead of time? Can you surprise and delight them in a way? One of our churches actually does a box that you get in the mail, and you don't get in the box is their name tag and a t-shirt and all the things. And it's this welcome, and you get this box in the mail and you're like, what are they sending me? And you open it up and you're like, wow. And it's nicely put together and all the things. So great point, Duncan. All right, so here's an interesting thing that I love, this idea of this bell curve. So if you think about a bell curve, a traditional bell curve, you have 20% of the people at the lower end, you have 20% of the people at the high end, and then you have 60% in the middle. So the idea is so you can see on the left over there, we have number of volunteers, and on the bottom, a level of engagement, or you could even say, your best volunteers. If you think about who those best volunteers are, if you were to chart your volunteers on this graph, every individual volunteer, you'd have some on the low side where you're like, hey, if they didn't want to volunteer anymore, it would be okay because they don't do it right anyway, and they're not actually helping your brand. Then you have those ones on the high side, and you're like, how do we duplicate these people? How do we get more of those people? And how do I help infiltrate what they're doing into the remaining others? Then you have that middle section, that 60% of the people that are in the middle. And honestly, when you have a new volunteer that comes on board, you'll train them to the high side, right? And then they're going to drift to their natural place. And the natural tendency of human beings is to gravitate towards the masses. Well, look at this chart. Where are the masses? They're right in the middle. So that 60% in the middle, not doing exactly what you want them to do, or not fully embodying the vision of what you're hoping to. But now your masses are there, and the new volunteers are going to conform. Even though you trained them well, you did the right things on the front side, they're going to get on a team, and they're going to conform to probably towards the middle of that group. So what is our job as leaders? Our job as leaders is to do this. It's to shift that curve I like to say right and tight. So if you look at it now, now there's still going to be some on the low side, but you have fewer people on the low side of engagement or even, kind of their training level. Now you have more people on this high side. And so you've squished that curve right and tight. So now look where your masses are. Your masses are more. And so if I'm going to join the team and I'm going to conform to the middle, my middle is now further over towards where I would love them to be. Now, how do you do that? In my opinion, it's all about leadership. Leadership is the difference there. And so making sure that you have the right leaders in place, one on your staff to lead the departments, but even your volunteer leaders, hand selecting those volunteer leaders and giving them, casting a lot of vision, helping, interviewing them ahead of time, knowing that that you're actually asking them to do a really important job. And I think at the end of this, I think Duncan's going to send out a leader guide that we put together from North Point that's really going to highlight how to do this. So that'll be a really good tool for you guys afterwards. All right, so now they're trained and now so you got them to come on board, you've got them trained, and now you're thinking, how do I keep them? How do I keep volunteers engaged and excited about what we're doing? So I'm going to breeze through this pretty quickly, and we can talk about some questions in the end. And you guys can talk about this in your cohorts too of any of this. But here's how we do it in terms of retaining volunteers. And it's not perfect, but I'm sure there's more ideas. But you absolutely have to create systems that support your volunteers. Nobody likes to walk to a room that's disorganized. It just makes you feel like they weren't ready for you. So create systems that say, we're ready for you. We're so glad that you're here and we can't do this without you. So everything that you do needs to support your volunteers in that way. Use clear and compelling communication in every single time you talk to your volunteers, whether it's a text, an email, Sunday mornings when you're maybe casting vision, clear and compelling. If it's not compelling, I'm probably not going to read it. So there's got to be, I like to do all my communication in, I call it a VIP strategy. So there's vision, information, and prayer. And so I'm always casting vision. Every time I'm in front of my volunteers, I'm casting some sort of vision, some nugget around those values that reminds them why we do what we do. Every single time. I don't ever stand in front of them or write them an email without that. And then the information that they need to know, keep that short, because that's again the boring stuff, right? You need them to know something, but keep it short. Bullet points, things like that. And then at the end, make sure that they know that you're praying for them and that you would love to know their specific prayer request, and make that easy for them to submit, and then follow up and pray for those people. The next thing is to remove barriers. Just like we remove barriers for guests that are walking in, we want to remove any possible barrier of why a person would choose to not serve. And you might have to do some focus groups to find out why they're not serving. And then once you discover why, make sure you're removing those barriers. Here's one that I discovered when I was at North Point. I found out that, so our guest experience volunteers tended to trend on the older side. And I was trying to lower my median age of volunteers. And so how do I do that? Well, I needed some younger people, right? I needed some 20s and 30s and 40s to come and join my 50s and 60s and 70s who were already volunteering. But when I went to them, I put together a focus group of anybody between 25 and 40 that I felt had some leadership capacity and capabilities. So I put together that focus group, and lo and behold, they all became leaders afterwards, which was amazing. Not immediately, but when a need opened up, I already had communication with them and I knew what questions they were asking. I knew they were on the right page and I got to groom them. But that focus group revealed some things. I learned that the 20s and 30s weren't volunteering in there, one, because everyone was older. So I wasn't attracting them because they didn't belong in their mind. And another reason why we weren't attracting, especially those 30s and 40s, is we had no way to care for their children while we were asking them to serve. So we had to solve that barrier and create a place for their kids to go so that the family could feel like, oh, now I can actually serve because now I have a solution for my children. So think about that. Next, this one I cannot overstress. That's why it's bold. Your volunteers need to feel known and needed. Now, think about, I had 1,200 volunteers that reported to me at North Point. There's no possible way I could help personally them to feel known and needed. But what I could do is I could work with my leaders, help them feel known and needed, and let them work with their own volunteer teams. And when I say leaders, these were volunteer leaders who were caring for a team, and I would groom them and develop them as much as possible. And that was my core group. If I had to, that's not that I didn't talk to other volunteers or even develop or appreciate them or whatever, but my core group that I was going to focus on were my leaders, because I wanted them to turn around and do the same thing. So what's rewarded is repeated. What's modeled is also repeated. So if they started doing that with their own teams, then every volunteer can feel known and needed. If they don't feel known and needed, if they feel like, there was plenty of volunteers today and they didn't actually need me, then all of a sudden they begin to drift off and stop coming because they didn't feel needed that day. This next one I also think is important: give meaningful ministry away. Too often we give our volunteers all kinds of tasks and leave it at that and say, here's your task list. In my opinion, yes, we're going to do some tasks, but ministry is never about the tasks. It's always about the people. So reminding people, like, for example, if I'm going to have a door greeter, if they think their job is to just stand there and hold the door open, I can get a doorstop to do that. It's not about the door, keeping the door open. It's about greeting the person who's walking through the door. It's about engaging. It's that whole, it goes back to that interaction over transaction idea. And then lastly, on this page, evaluate that role of the volunteer. Elevate that. And that's super important. Making sure that they know that the volunteer role is at any level is incredibly important. And you can't do this or pull off your ministry or mission without them. And when they understand their important role and how it ties into the mission, you'll see them engage a little bit higher. And then lastly, can't underestimate this: appreciate your volunteers and find every possible way that you can to appreciate them. I'm a huge believer in the handwritten note. When they get a handwritten, especially in today's day and age when most things come digitally, when they receive a handwritten note in the mail and it's something specific, it is memorable to them and they want to give more of their time and energy to being a part of this mission. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting is, so I had a personal practice of every Monday morning, I would write a minimum of 5 cards. Every single Monday, 5 cards, oftentimes I would write more because I knew I was going to do that on Monday. Every Sunday, I was like jotting down notes. Who am I going to write to tomorrow? And being specific. And so oftentimes when you're aware of something, you would be amazed how many more come to the surface. But I would just spend my first part of Monday morning writing all those notes, dropped them in the mail, and forgot about them. The interesting thing was the following Sunday or several Sundays later, when I saw that volunteer again, they would come up and thank me for that note. And honestly, I would forget in a certain sense that I even sent it. It was so rhythmic for me, but it made the biggest deposits in the life of my volunteers. And then I think you need to think through, what are all the ways that you can appreciate your volunteers? It might be through a little gift of some sort occasionally. It might be through a volunteer appreciation event. But regardless, you want to make sure that you're appreciating them and saying thank you as often as you can so that they will want to come back. And that's it.
Wow, Rhonda, honestly, I genuinely had no idea that you were going to present us with such rich material. I thought you would throw out a couple of ideas. It feels like I've come to you and said, give me your best ideas for how we gain volunteers, we train them, and then we retain them. And it feels like you've emptied your handbag and then you've put your hands in your pockets and pulled out 2 or 3 more things, and then your back pocket, and you've just put everything, you've walked away with nothing. You've put everything your experience has told us, has told you on the table for us to learn from. So I am super, super grateful for that. I mean, just the start, one of the questions that we're all asking at the moment is, how do we get more volunteers? How do we gain volunteers? And I've listed down the kind of 12 or 13 that you gave us at the start. I mean, we can go away and work on those. There is at least 3 or 4 ideas that every single one of us can take from that and say, I can do that today. Even if we did what you said at the end there, if we just how amazing would it feel from the lead pastors here to get, or for the leaders of teams to get a handwritten note or a card from someone saying, I see what you do. It's of great value, and I'm so glad you're part of my team. It would mean so much. Not a text or an email, but actually a handwritten note. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rhonda.